August 4, 2025, the day the world will watch Pretoria. A South African court is about to decide the fate of Zambia's late former president, Edgar Chagwa Lungu. But this isn't just a burial, it's a diplomatic earthquake shaking two nations. Why was Lungu holding a foreign passport? Why did his family refuse to return his body to Zambia? And how did this tragedy spiral into a courtroom showdown involving Esther Lungu and Makebi Zulu? The decision could trigger political chaos or bring long-awaited closure. One thing is certain, the whole of Africa is watching. Stay tuned, because what happens next could change everything. A former president dies in exile. A legal battle erupts across borders. And now, all eyes are on August 4 as South African judges prepare for a decision that could change African diplomacy forever. Will Edgar Lungu be laid to rest in Zambia, or will his body remain trapped in legal limbo? This is the moment we've all been waiting for. Breaking. South African judges are set to deliver a final verdict on August 4th regarding the burial of Zambia's late former president, Edgar Chagwa Lungu. This unprecedented legal battle has not only shaken the Lungu family, including former First Lady Esther Lungu and lawyer Makebi Zulu, but it's also testing diplomatic ties between Zambia and South Africa. In this full documentary-style report, we take you inside the Pretoria High Court hearings, the political controversy surrounding Lungu's death in exile, and the emotional pressure mounting from both nations. Will his body be sent home to Zambia, or will legal technicalities override the family's wishes? Watch till the end to understand what's really happening behind the scenes. Introduction. Lungu's fate in the hands of South African court. The death of Edgar Chagwa Lungu, Zambia's 6th president 2015 to 2021, on June 5, 2025, in a South African hospital has sparked a contentious legal and political battle over his burial. This dispute, now centered in the Pretoria High Court in South Africa, pits the Zambian government against Lungu's family, led by his widow, Esther Lungu, and their spokesperson, Makebi Zulu. The core issue is whether Lungu's body should be repatriated to Zambia for a state funeral or buried in South Africa as per his family's wishes. This case is not merely a logistical disagreement, but a reflection of deep-seated political rivalries, particularly between Lungu and his successor, President Hakainde Hichilema. The outcome, to be further deliberated on August 4, 2025, could set a significant precedent for how African nations handle the funerals of former heads of state, with implications for national identity, sovereignty, and individual rights. The Pretoria High Court's involvement underscores the international dimension of the dispute, as South Africa has become the stage for a legal showdown that has drawn attention across the African continent. The case raises questions about the balance between state authority and family autonomy, the legacy of political feuds, and the cultural significance of burial practices in Zambia and beyond. As Africa watches closely, the resolution of this case could influence diplomatic relations, legal frameworks, and public sentiment in Zambia and the region. How Edgar Lungu died in exile. Edgar Lungu, born November 11, 1956, died at the age of 68 on June 5, 2025, at Mediclinic Medforum in Pretoria, South Africa, following cardiac complications from a surgical procedure. The exact nature of his illness was not publicly disclosed, but reports indicate he had been receiving specialized treatment in South Africa for a long-standing health condition, possibly related to achalasia, a rare esophageal disorder for which he had previously sought treatment in Pretoria in 2015. Lungu's health had been a subject of public concern, with a notable collapse in June 2021 during a televised military event in Zambia due to a hypoglycemic attack linked to his condition, and Wikipedia.org. Lungu's presence in South Africa at the time of his death has been described by some as exile, though this term is contentious. The Lungu family and their supporters allege that the Zambian government under President Hichilema restricted Lungu's movements, effectively forcing him to seek medical care abroad. Court documents reveal that Zambia's Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha admitted under oath that the government deliberately blocked Lungu from traveling to South Africa and South Korea in September 2023, citing concerns that he was using these trips for political purposes. The family claims that these restrictions delayed critical medical treatment, potentially exacerbating Lungu's condition. Esther Lungu stated in an affidavit that had Lungu received earlier medical attention, his cancer, if that was the illness, might have been treated more effectively. The Zambian government denies these allegations, asserting that Lungu was not barred from seeking medical care and that any restrictions were based on national security concerns. Zambian Observer, Daily Maverick, O.za. The notion of exile also stems from Lungu's fraught relationship with the Hichilema administration. After losing the 2021 election, Lungu faced allegations of political persecution, including claims of being placed under effective house arrest and having his movements restricted. His eventual travel to South Africa in early 2025 for medical treatment, coupled with his death there, has fueled narratives among his supporters that he was driven out of Zambia by a hostile government. However, the government maintains that Lungu was a private citizen at the time of his death, and his presence in South Africa was a personal choice, not a forced exile. PBS or Gambaqui.com. This dispute over Lungu's death circumstances has amplified the emotional and political stakes of the burial controversy, with the family framing their decision to bury him in South Africa as a fulfillment of his final wishes to avoid a state-controlled funeral in Zambia. Why the burial became a court case. The burial of Edgar Lungu became a court case due to a fundamental disagreement between the Zambian government and Lungu's family over where and how he should be laid to rest. The Zambian government, led by President Hichilema, insists that as a former head of state, Lungu's body is national property and must be repatriated to Zambia for a state funeral with full military honors at Embassy Park, the designated burial site for Zambian presidents. This position is grounded in Zambian law, specifically Article 177(5)(c) of the Constitution, which empowers the Attorney General to act in matters of public interest, and the Benefits Act, which outlines state responsibilities for former presidents, including their funerals. The government argues that a state funeral is a national event that allows all Zambians to pay their respects, citing the precedent of founding President Kenneth Kaunda, whose burial was also state-managed despite family objections. TheGuardian.com Zambia Monitor, ComZambiaMonitor.com. Conversely, Lungu's family, supported by his political party, the Patriotic Front (PF), insists on a private burial in South Africa, in accordance with Lungu's explicit wishes that Hichilema should not be involved in his funeral. The family's distrust of the government stems from a long-standing feud between Lungu and Hichilema, marked by political rivalry and personal animosity. During Lungu's presidency, Hichilema was imprisoned for over 100 days on treason charges in 2017, an incident that deepened their enmity. After Hichilema's 2021 election victory, Lungu accused the government of targeting him and his family with harassment, including corruption charges against Esther Lungu and their children. The family's decision to opt for a South African burial was further solidified when the government released a draft funeral program that included Hichilema presiding over the event, which the family viewed as a betrayal of their agreement to limit his role. BBC.com Daily Maverick, ZambBC.com. The dispute escalated when the Zambian government filed an urgent application in the Pretoria High Court on June 24, 2025, to halt the family's planned private burial in Johannesburg on June 25, 2025. The court, presided over by Deputy Judge President Aubrey Fago Ledwaba, issued an interim order preventing the burial, with both parties agreeing to postpone the funeral until a full hearing on August 4, 2025. The legal battle names Esther Lungu, their children Bertha, Tassila, Chaisu, and Dalitso, family associate Charles Fairai, lawyer Makebi Zulu, and Two Mountains Proprietary, the South African mortuary holding Lungu's remains, as respondents. The case has transformed a private family matter into a public and international legal dispute, highlighting tensions over state authority, individual rights, and the politicization of a former president's legacy. PBS or Lusaka Times, CompBS.org. Esther Lungu and Makebi Zulu enter the battle. Esther Lungu, the former First Lady, and Makebi Zulu, the family's spokesperson and lawyer, have been central figures in the legal and public battle over Edgar Lungu's burial. Esther Lungu, now residing in Centurion, South Africa, has been vocal in her affidavit to the Pretoria High Court, asserting that her husband explicitly instructed that Hichilema should not be near his funeral or body. She argues that the family's decision to bury Lungu in South Africa honors his final wishes and protects his dignity from what they perceive as a politically motivated state funeral. Esther's position is complicated by her own legal challenges in Zambia, where she faces corruption charges related to alleged theft of motor vehicles, to which she has pleaded not guilty. These charges have been cited by the family as evidence of the Hichilema administration's vendetta against them, further fueling their resolve to control the burial arrangements. Daily Maverick, The Guardian, Gambaqui.com. Makebi Zulu, a prominent Zambian lawyer and Lungu family spokesperson, has been the public face of the family's legal strategy. He has consistently articulated the family's position, emphasizing Lungu's desire for a private ceremony and accusing the Zambian government of turning a solemn occasion into a political spectacle. Zulu has also highlighted the government's alleged interference in Lungu's medical travel, claiming it contributed to his death. In court, Zulu, alongside South African attorney Neo Mashel, argues that the family's rights to decide on burial arrangements supersede the state's claims, especially since Lungu's benefits as a former president were reportedly terminated in October 2023 after he announced plans to return to politics. BBC, CombBC, Daily Maverick, LZA. Both Esther Lungu and Makebi Zulu have garnered support from the Patriotic Front, with acting President Given Labinda condemning the government's actions as disrespectful to a former head of state. However, their stance has drawn criticism from some quarters, with detractors arguing that their insistence on a South African burial deprives Zambians of the opportunity to mourn their former leader. The involvement of Esther and Zulu has thus intensified the emotional and political dimensions of the case, positioning them as key players in a battle that transcends personal grief. BBC.com/LusakaTimes.com. Pretoria High Court, inside the legal arguments. The Pretoria High Court, under Deputy Judge President Aubrey Fago Ledwaba, is the arena for this high-stakes legal dispute. The Zambian government's case, filed by Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha, rests on several key arguments: national interest and legal precedent. The government cites Article 177(5)(c) of the Zambian Constitution, which authorizes the Attorney General to act in matters of public interest, and the Benefits Act, which mandates state funerals for former presidents. Kabesha argues that Lungu, as a former head of state, is national property, and his burial should be conducted in Zambia with full military honors at Embassy Park, where other presidents are buried. The precedent of Kenneth Kanda's state burial, despite family objections, is invoked to assert that national interest supersedes personal wishes. Zambia monitored, Daily Maverick, AzadiGuardian.com. State responsibility. The government contends that a state funeral is a national event that allows all Zambians to pay their respects, aligning with cultural and legal norms. Kabesha has stated that a grave has already been prepared at Embassy Park, and the government is ready to facilitate a dignified send-off. PBS.org.theguardian.com. Public order. The government argues that allowing a former president to be buried abroad could set a precedent that undermines national unity and protocol, potentially causing public unrest. Gambaqui.com. The Lungu family, represented by Makebi Zulu and Neo Mashal, counters with the following arguments. Lungu's final wishes. Esther Lungu's affidavit emphasizes that Lungu explicitly instructed that Hichilema should not be involved in his funeral, a wish rooted in their political rivalry, and Lungu's belief that the government would not afford him a dignified burial. The family argues that honoring these wishes is paramount, especially since no will has been found to contradict their claims. Daily Maverick, Asia Daily Maverick, O.za. Family rights. The family asserts their legal and moral right to controlled burial arrangements, particularly given the government's alleged termination of Lungu's benefits in 2023, which they claim stripped him of his status as a state-protected former president. They argue that the government's insistence on a state funeral is politically motivated to project an image of unity under Hichilema's leadership. Daily Maverick, Anytimes.com. Government misconduct. The family cites the government's restrictions on Lungu's travel as evidence of bad faith, arguing that these actions contributed to his death and justify their distrust of a state-led funeral. Daily Maverick, ZambianObserver.com. The court's interim ruling on June 25, 2025, halted the planned burial at the Cathedral of Christ the King in Johannesburg, with both parties agreeing to postpone until August 4, 2025. The government has until July 4, 2025 to submit its amended notice of motion, while the family has until July 11, 2025 to file opposing papers. The court has reserved costs for the urgent application to be determined at the final hearing. The legal arguments highlight a clash between state authority and individual autonomy, with significant implications for Zambian law and regional precedents. PBS RGN News 24, combc.com. Zambian government's official position. The Zambian government's official position, articulated by Attorney General Mulalo Kabesha and President Hichilema, is that Edgar Lungu, as a former president, must be buried in Zambia with a state funeral to honor his legacy and allow the nation to mourn collectively. The government emphasizes the following points. PBS.org.com. National duty. Lungu's status as a former head of state makes his burial a matter of national significance, governed by law and tradition. The government has prepared a grave at Embassy Park and insists that a state funeral is the only appropriate course. PBS.org.theguardian.com. Unity and dignity. Hichilema has called for peace, love, and unity during this period of grief, arguing that a state funeral would provide closure for Zambians and uphold national dignity. BBCcombc.com. Legal authority. Citing the Kanda precedent and constitutional provisions, the government asserts its right to oversee the burial, dismissing the family's wishes as secondary to public interest. BBC.com/ZambiaMonitor.com. Engagement with family. The government claims it has made repeated efforts to negotiate with the Lungu family, including sending envoys to South Africa, but accuses the family of reneging on agreements, such as the initial plan for a state funeral on June 22, 2025. BBCcombc.com. The government's position has been criticized by the Patriotic Front and civil society groups, who argue that it is politicizing Lungu's death and disregarding his family's rights. Hichilema's cancellation of the 16-day national mourning period on June 20, 2025, citing the need to resume normal life, was seen by some as a dismissive response to the ongoing dispute. BBCcombc.comapnews.com. What happens on August 4? Key scenarios. The Pretoria High Court hearing on August 4, 2025 will be a pivotal moment in resolving the dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial. Several potential scenarios could emerge, each with significant implications. Court rules in favor of the Zambian government. Outcome. The court orders the repatriation of Lungu's body to Zambia for a state funeral at Embassy Park, upholding the government's argument that national interest supersedes family wishes. Implications. This would reinforce Zambia's legal framework for state funerals and set a regional precedent for state control over former leaders' burials. However, it could deepen public divisions, particularly among Lungu supporters, who may view it as a victory for Hichilema's administration over the Lungu family. The PF could use this outcome to rally political opposition, framing it as evidence of government overreach. Gambaqui.com. Challenges. Enforcing the ruling could be logistically complex if the family resists, potentially requiring diplomatic coordination between South Africa and Zambia. Public protests or unrest in Zambia are also possible if the decision is seen as disrespectful to Lungu. Lungu's legacy. Court rules in favor of the Lungu family. Outcome: the court upholds the family's right to bury Lungu in South Africa, recognizing their autonomy and Lungu's expressed wishes. Implications: this would be a landmark victory for individual and family rights over state authority, potentially influencing similar cases across Africa. It could strain Zambia-South Africa relations, as some South African groups have expressed concerns about the precedent of a foreign head of state being buried on their soil. In Zambia, the decision could alienate citizens who wish to mourn Lungu at home, but it would resonate with PF supporters and those critical of Hichilema's government. Gambaqui.com. Challenges: the family would need to navigate logistical and financial arrangements for a private burial in South Africa, potentially facing public backlash in Zambia for denying the nation a state funeral. Negotiated settlement. Outcome: the court facilitates a compromise, such as a state funeral in Zambia with limited involvement from Hichilema, or a private burial in South Africa followed by a memorial in Zambia. Implications: this scenario could de-escalate tensions, allowing both sides to honor Lungu's legacy while addressing public and family concerns. It would require significant diplomatic efforts and goodwill, which have been lacking. Thus, FAR, PBS, or BBC.com. Challenges: reaching a consensus would depend on both parties' willingness to compromise, which seems unlikely given the entrenched positions and public rhetoric. Any deviation from Lungu's wishes could still provoke criticism from the family and PF. Delayed resolution. Outcome: the court postpones its decision due to complex legal arguments or additional interventions, keeping Lungu's remains in limbo at Two Mountains Funeral Home. Gambaqui.com. Implications: a prolonged dispute would exacerbate public frustration and grief, potentially escalating political tensions in Zambia. It could also strain South Africa's position as a neutral host, drawing further international scrutiny. Gambaqui.com. Challenges: extended legal proceedings would increase costs for all parties and prolong the emotional toll on Lungu's family and supporters. The August 4th hearing will likely focus on balancing legal precedents, cultural norms, and the unique circumstances of Lungu's case, with the court's decision shaping Zambia's political landscape and regional discussions on state funerals. International reactions. Africa watches closely. The dispute over Edgar Lungu's burial has attracted significant attention across Africa, given its implications for political, legal, and cultural norms. Key international reactions include South Africa's position. The South African government has expressed a commitment to handling the matter with dignity and respect, with Minister Ronald Lamola stating that while a state burial in Zambia would best honor Lungu's legacy, the family's wishes must be considered. However, some South African civic groups, such as Progressive Forces, have petitioned against Lungu's burial in South Africa, citing concerns about Zambian visitors overstaying and potential immigration issues. These groups argue that allowing a foreign head of state to be buried in South Africa could set a problematic precedent. Gambaqui.com. Regional leaders. Condolence messages have come from leaders like Kenya's president, indicating regional acknowledgement of Lungu's influence. However, most African leaders have refrained from commenting on the burial dispute, likely to avoid entanglement in a sensitive diplomatic issue. BBC.com. African legal and political observers. The case is seen as a test of state versus individual rights in the context of former leaders' funerals. The precedent of Kenneth Kanda's burial, where the Zambian government overruled family wishes, is frequently cited in regional media as a comparison. Observers note that the outcome could influence how African nations balance national protocols with personal autonomy, particularly in politically charged contexts. BBC.com. Civil society and media. Zambian civil society groups, such as the Council of Churches in Zambia, have called for a resolution that unites the nation and honors Lungu's memory. Regional media outlets, including BBC Africa and News 24, have covered the dispute extensively, highlighting its implications for Zambia-South Africa relations and the broader African political landscape. BBC.com News24.com. The international focus underscores the case's significance beyond Zambia, as it touches on universal themes of legacy, sovereignty, and the treatment of former leaders. The Pretoria High Court's decision will be closely watched for its potential to shape regional norms. Final thoughts. What if Lungu isn't buried in Zambia? If Edgar Lungu is not buried in Zambia, the implications would be profound for the nation, the region, and the Lungu family's legacy. Several key considerations arise. National identity and mourning. A South African burial would deprive Zambians of the opportunity to collectively mourn their former president, potentially deepening public divisions. Embassy Park, as the traditional resting place for presidents, symbolizes national unity and continuity. Excluding Lungu from this site could be seen as a break from tradition, fueling perceptions of political vindictiveness by the Hichilema administration. PBS or Gambaqui.com. Political fallout. The Patriotic Front and Lungu supporters could leverage a South African burial to criticize the government, framing it as a betrayal of Lungu's legacy and a sign of authoritarian overreach. This could galvanize opposition ahead of Zambia's 2026 elections, intensifying political polarization. New York Times. Lusakatimes.com. Diplomatic relations. A burial in South Africa could strain Zambia-South Africa relations, particularly if South African groups continue to oppose it on immigration or or precedent grounds. Conversely, South Africa's neutral stance could strengthen its reputation as a mediator, but only if the process is handled diplomatically. Family's perspective. For the Lungu family, a South African burial would fulfill Edgar's wishes and protect his dignity from perceived government interference. However, it could alienate them from sections of the Zambian public who view a state funeral as a national right. The family's ongoing legal battles, particularly Esther Lungu's corruption charges, could further complicate their public image. TheGuardian.com Daily Maverick. O.ca. Regional precedent. A South African burial would be unprecedented for a foreign head of state, potentially encouraging other families of African leaders to seek burials abroad to avoid state control. This could challenge established protocols and spark debates about the rights of former leaders' families versus state obligations. Yambakwi.com. Cultural significance. In Zambia, a Christian-majority nation, burial practices carry deep cultural and religious weight. A private burial abroad might be seen as a rejection of communal mourning traditions, causing distress among citizens who wish to honor Lungu at home. BBC.com. Ultimately, the resolution of this dispute will shape Zambia's political narrative and its approach to honoring former leaders. Whether Lungu is buried in Zambia or South Africa, the case underscores the enduring impact of political rivalries and the delicate balance between state authority and personal wishes. The August 4th, 2025 hearing will be a defining moment not only for Lungu's legacy, but for the broader discourse on governance, dignity, and national unity in Africa.